name is Kendra Johnson. I'm the president and CEO of the Association for Mineral Exploration down in British Columbia, and it's a pleasure to be up here. I spent a number of years working up in the Yukon, so kind of feels a little bit like coming back home, and want to congratulate the team here at the Yukon Chamber of Mines and everybody who's been part of organizing it. It's been a great conference so far, and again, a lot of fun to see so many friendly faces in the audience. So thank you for hosting, and thank you for being brave and hosting a full conference this year, and congratulations on the 50th anniversary. It's an incredible achievement. Okay, great. So we will start with Doug and Paul. And Doug, I'm going to start with you for a brief introduction because we've just heard from Paul on stage. But critical minerals have become somewhat, oh, and here's Scott joining us now, great. Critical minerals has become somewhat synonymous lately for the low carbon future. So by way of introduction, if you can just give us a short bio on who you are, but maybe also one or two things that you've changed in the last year or two as this conversation has become more prevalent in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis at Strategic Metals.
I think most people here know me, but my name is Doug Eaton. I'm the president and CEO of Strategic Metals. I've been working in Yukon for over 50 years. And the company name is a bit of the reason why I'm sitting here. We recognize the importance of strategic metals, critical metals, whatever term you want to use for them, quite a while ago, and have spent the last about 20 years amassing as many projects as we can in Yukon and the western part of Northwest Territories that host metals that have not been part of their traditional economy. Everybody knows, as Paul has nicely pointed out, the copper is critical going forward, but it's a major metal. It's traded on the exchanges, widely traded, widely produced. But there's a lot of other specialty metals that have much more critical niches, and we've tried to look at those as well as the big ones like copper and zinc. So I think it's a very exciting time. I think Yukon, people will be surprised with the diversity of metals that are here and how some of those metals fit into the low carbon economy.
Great, thanks Doug. Paul, we'll go to you and then over to Scott.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think everyone just saw my talk, so I don't know if I can add a whole lot more to it, other than, you know, it was interesting. I was actually at LME Week, I guess 3 weeks ago now in London, and, you know, they were talking about critical minerals, and, you know, people think of things like cobalt and the you know, rare earths and those sort of things, and those are important, but, you know, they still came back and they said the ones to watch for are actually copper and lithium. Were the two that they flagged as being, there's just not enough supply of those. And the other ones are critical, absolutely, but, you know, copper is still, you know, one that they're quite worried about, you know, the supply and demand fundamentals not adding up.
Okay, I also spoke not long ago, and I'm very sorry for being late. I got accosted in the corridor and about 74 times on the way here, so I apologise. Yeah, so my background is actually in building mines. So we've been operating up in the Yukon for 8 years, but this is I can't remember now, 5th or 6th mine I've been involved in, and they've all been a little bit unique. So we're talking about gold mines, yes, but zinc, lead, nickel, chromite, not all things that are that common, but I think. As these two have said, you know, the critical minerals conversation is a hot topic, and the reality is, if this world wants to be a better world, if we want to use less energy, if we want to create opportunities to use energy smarter, and really that's what it's all about, right? It's not about coming up with more and more and more and more energy sources. It's more, how can we not waste the resources we've got? How can we store the peak loads that we get from power stations so we can use them? How can we store the power that we generate in power stations so that in times of peak load we have that as a reserve? And, you know, it is about the specialty critical minerals, if I can call it that, but it's also about the need for smarter uses of what we've got. So, for example, everyone talks about cobalt and nickel and lithium about being, great sources of batteries. And they are, because of the characteristics of lithium and cobalt, for example, lithium ions and in the way they retain charge and release charge. But what the world has not really started talking about is what the opportunity for city-wide batteries is, for example, and the zinc oxide, the zinc ion batteries are something that are in a very early stage. But for example, Buffalo University's got a 1 megawatt zinc ion battery. No one ever talks about stuff like that. So critical minerals are critical for a reason, not just because they're in short supply, but also because the opportunity to use them in a different way is real, and those conversations need to start, and they need to start now, and that's pretty much all I've got to say on that.
Yeah, excuse me. And I think, it's a really great point. Critical minerals are critical for a variety of reasons, and they're critical to our economy, they're critical to the low carbon future, they're critical to reconciliation, they're critical to the next generation of geologists and mine engineers who are going to come up and study and take this industry to the next level. So it really is all encompassing. But bringing it back into the capital markets conversation, you've all been on the investor tour, you've all done many meetings over the last couple months, let alone years, with the investors. So how is that conversation changing today from, let's say, 2 to 3 years ago? What kinds of questions are you being asked today that you perhaps weren't a couple years ago?
Sure, I'll go first. Yeah, I mean, it has changed significantly, and I would say there's a couple of things. I mean, first of all, obviously lots of interest in critical minerals, in copper, in battery metals. I mean, they got a bunch of different names on them, and I mean, I'm a perfect example. So copper, gold, right? 5 years ago, all I talked about was 21 million ounces of gold. Big gold deposit, and yeah, it's got a little bit of copper as well. Now, people don't even want to talk about the gold. They're much more focused on the copper. And I think the other thing that's really coming out is the importance of that sort of ESG component. How green is that copper, and what relationships do you have with the community, with the local indigenous groups, all of those things, and those questions are becoming increasingly important for any mining company. And I mean, part of our conversations that we've had with Rio Tinto as a strategic investor is the importance for them of, I mean, they as a company have net zero by 2050 as a company, and so they're looking to invest in projects where they can see that future as well.
Yeah, Paul's 100% right. The biggest question change that's occurred for us relates to sustainability. It's frequently asked now, and 2 or 3 years ago it was never asked. And the sustainability obviously includes things like relationships with communities, but also extends into your carbon footprint, and even at the exploration stage. If I could just go a little bit of an aside on this, the other thing that we're beginning to get questions or comments on is the critical metals flow through. And Strategic Metals was, according to Pear Tree, I think the first company in Canada to do a critical metals flow through, which they gave us quite a nice premium for that money above what you would get for normal metals. And as long as you can comply or satisfy the requirements of which metals you're looking for in the relative proportions, then you're eligible. So I'd certainly encourage everyone here to become familiar with the terms and see if it applies to their projects. There's a pretty broad spectrum of metals, but there are rules, and you better figure out what they are before you raise the money.
That's a great point. There's 15 minerals and metals that are on that list for eligibility for critical mineral tax credit. Scott?
Yeah, we're a private company, so we get asked slightly different questions. But one of the questions that we have always been asked is, when are we going to see you into production? and at the end of the day, we do have conversations. I showed a very important a greenhouse gas emission intensity graph on my slideshow this morning, and that is absolutely a hot topic in Canada right now in relation to, you know, what are the benefits that you're going to bring as a project through what are the negatives. And so that's important, but the question about when are you coming into production and when can we see it? And I was speaking to some zinc smelters a couple of weeks ago in a couple in Europe and one in Japan. And what they told me is that that the zinc price is currently very good. It's not as good as it was a year ago, but it's certainly still better than what we had anticipated it was going to be a couple of years ago. And what they're telling me is, look, we've got very low stockpiles for a whole range of reasons. Canada, for example, Canada's largest zinc mine is in the process of closing down, and Canada's not going to have any large zinc mines or limited zinc mines until the next one comes along, and hopefully that's us. But what they were saying is, look, zinc is currently at a price, and we produce zinc metal, but when we produce that metal, we actually charge a premium, and they've always charged a premium. This is not unique to zinc. I'm just using zinc as an example. We've always charged a premium at the end of the smelter for the metal. So there's an LME price, which is the global LME price. That's the sort of the price we all talk about, and it's currently about $1.20 a pound. And historically, that premium has been about 5 cents a pound, and that's to cover the selling costs and the transport to the buyer costs and things like that. Right now, that premium is 35 to 40 cents a pound, and it's not what you see. What you see is the LME price, and this is, as I said, this is not just in zinc. It's a premium because there is a real issue right now in actually being able to deliver the metal. So when we talk about the green economies, when we talk about critical metals, it's not just about mining. It's not just about finding deposits, although Alex Christopher this morning raised a very good point about the timeline between finding a deposit and bringing it into production. But at every single level throughout the supply chain, there is stress. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of conversations on a lot of issues, but don't think that this is a very narrow topic. It's a broad topic around the world.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And you brought up the battery minerals earlier, and some of those other strategic minerals that are really required not only for the low carbon future, but for technologies, for the other supply chains to keep the world economies moving along. But you also touched on the fact, Scott, that your project is quite complex. It's a polymetallic. There's lots of things going on. Paul, you touched earlier in your previous presentation about the byproducts that can come out of your project, and Doug, you're out exploring. You can explore for whatever you choose to explore for. And so I'm wondering how those conversations internally within your companies have perhaps changed a little bit over the last little while. And Paul, you talk about promoting the gold side of the project versus the copper side of the project, but have you had conversations recently about the byproducts and perhaps changing some of the milling process to accommodate for those? Are those conversations that are now coming in to decision-making processes, given the importance of critical minerals, or are we still really focusing on the copper aspects and or the zinc for Scott?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. I mean, I think one of the things that, I mean, when you see this importance of critical minerals come up as we've seen, you go back and you start to look at everything. You look at your metallurgy, you look at your concentrate, and you see what you have. And, do you have cobalt? Do you have these sort of things? Mm-hmm. And, with our project, the one thing that pops up is rhenium. Rhenium is actually quite significant in our molybdenum concentrate. It's not included in any of the economics, but I mean, again, this is something that we will increasingly focus on in terms of moving forward. But also, I mean, just, we've always been primarily a copper project, so, it is optimized around copper, but like, it's more like a few years ago we were, okay, what can we do to maximize the gold recovery? Now we're like back to, okay, now let's really focus on copper and make sure that that's, the primary metal, and we've done what we can to maximize the recovery of that.
The concept of byproducts and co-product metals is really interesting because one of the factors which I really hope the Western governments are fully factoring into their reasoning is that China's control of a lot of critical metals isn't that they produce and mine the metals. In some cases, they don't even smelt the metals. What they've done is they've created the world's greatest refinery complexes. And a lot of the high-tech metals, not the coppers and the zincs of the world, but the ones that are really have to be at high level of purities to be used, have to be refined. And if there's only one place in the world you can get them refined, then it doesn't really matter where the deposit is. It doesn't matter who controls the deposit, it's who controls the refineries. So that's something that for that aspect of critical metals is going to have to be attended to. Changing direction almost completely here, back to the question of does it come up in our corporate discussion? Yeah, absolutely. We're constantly looking at potential co-products and projects that we're involved with. And we're also looking for different deposit types than the norm. Cobalt, for example, most of the cobalt produced comes either from copper deposits in the Congo or from byproducts of nickel. And Steve Israel is going to be talking about a project that we're working on this year. He's going to be talking about the BAT project, where we found some very interesting cobalt in a very different environment. And I think that as explorationists, we have to consider that. There's any number of metals that maybe the traditional sources are limited or are restricted to very politically sensitive areas. And there may be alternative sources that we can develop here that have been overlooked. And I just want to stress to people that broaden the perspective a little bit and make sure that you read well down your assay pages. We've got one project that we found a number of years ago for Silver Range that was loaded with indium. And indium typically is in the sphalerite, but if you do a calculation on the amount of indium that's in that and assume it's in the sphalerite and you make a sphalerite concentrate, it's one of the richest indium deposits in the world. So it can be very, very interesting. You become aware of what threshold values are there that for those low metals, and you might be surprised what's in some of the projects.
Yeah, look, we don't really have a lot of other metals. I mean, we've got our 5 key metals, and we have a degree of flexibility within the processing stream. So, for example, we can produce a zinc concentrate and sell the zinc concentrate, but we actually have the capability of dividing that zinc concentrate and producing 2 different zinc concentrates, one being a relatively pure zinc concentrate with only zinc in it, and the other one being quite a complex zinc concentrate that's got a lot of gold and silver in it, and we could sell that to a different market. So in our marketing, so we've sold, we've got buyers for most of our product already, but some of those buyers have come in and said, look, can you deliver us a different product? And I think it's really important that you really understand the buyer, and while we don't have any of these very special or very specialty minerals, understanding the buyer and the end user and what they're going to do with the product is really important. Some years ago, I was selling a zinc concentrate to a company that's no longer in existence, Padang Industries in Thailand, and they were kind enough to accept my request to come and have a look at their smelter. So I dropped into their smelter, and they were showing me around very proudly, and as I said, they were buying our zinc concentrate, and they only paid us for the percentage of the zinc in the concentrate. And so in the process of looking around their facilities, I saw over in the far corner of a big shed, I saw some float cells, and these are just cells where they pop air up and float some materials over the lip and recover it as concentrate. And I said to them, what are you doing over there? And they said, oh, nothing. And I sort of said, oh no, let's go and have a look over there. And they eventually sort of I won't say they shamefacedly showed me, but they agreed to let me go and have a look. And what they were doing was they were taking the zinc concentrate and they were refloating it and taking off the copper impurities in the zinc concentrate on the side, and then they were creating copper or selling the copper concentrate from that as a little bit of a business on the side. And so we had been told for several years that our concentrate was an inferior product because it was lower grade zinc. I think it was 48, 49% zinc. But what they hadn't told me was that the 5% copper, they were making shitloads. And so, our conversations around what our concentrate was worth changed quite a lot after that. But I think it's really important. Markets change, needs change, and your product, whatever you're doing today, can be worth different or be viewed differently in the marketplace tomorrow than what it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And so I would just say the rules aren't the rules, and the rules change, and you've just got to be really nimble and understand new needs when they come up.
Yeah, so there's one thing I'd be remiss if I didn't add, and it's a warning to all you PGOs out there. Don't get too excited about the value of the byproducts or the trace metal elements. You may not get paid for them, and it's an adjunct to what we just said. The refineries, the smelters may be picking the product up, but they may not pay you for it. Mm-hmm. And a classic example of that is Whitehorse Copper. For many years, produced a high gallium concentrate, and they never got a paid penny for their gallium. So you got to be super, super careful, and if you're doing a report, don't wax too eloquent about the trace metal content of every little thing that shows up in your assays, because you better become somewhat aware of smelter contracts before you start attributing any value to it.
Yeah, and I'll just throw in another point on that. I mean, back to your point, Scott, I mean, someone buys concentrate, and so it's every smelter is a little bit different on how they're going to pay you. And I mean, for us, for example, the copper concentrate, I mean, we've talked to, Japanese smelting companies and Chinese smelting companies, and, the Japanese point out quite quickly to us, we can pay you a lot more for the gold in your copper concentrate than the Chinese can, because we have a completely different system to recover it, and so we can pay you more. But yeah, I mean, back to your point, Doug, and as a metallurgist working with geologists, you can't just add all the assays up and multiply them by the LME price.
Of course you can.
You can, but...
So what's coming out here is actually that this is, you guys are Canadian-based companies, you are exploring in the Yukon, this is home, but it is a global industry, and you guys are clearly having conversations worldwide about where your concentrates are going and the investment that's coming in. So I know you all follow global markets, whether those be the commodity markets or the stock exchanges. And of course, the things that are happening around the world now, we're seeing obviously developments in China and India and other places that are requiring far more copper. We also, of course, have the war in between Russia and Ukraine. So I'm wondering how that's affecting commodity prices, stock markets, Scott, maybe day-to-day life in Europe. So Scott, maybe we'll start with you, but how has that changed the conversation around critical minerals, the need for some of these things? And again, I'll maybe take a step back. There's also the national security component from Canada. We've seen Canada deter or turn away Chinese investors from some Canadian companies recently as well. So how are all these things factoring into to the critical minerals and the conversation that you're having around markets and prices these days?
That is a very broad question. I think there's probably a half-hour conversation that alone. Trying to keep it brief, and that's not something I'm known for, according to Mike Berkey. So the security issue, let's just talk about that very quickly. So the issue of national security is a hot topic, and the discussions inside Canada and how the Canadian government is viewing ownership of projects is something everyone in this room knows about. For our part, look, we have simply gone out and we only talk pretty much only talk to the smelters. So we're selling product or looking to sell product to Korea. We're looking to smelters in Korea. We're looking to sell product to smelters in Japan, smelters in Canada, and companies that own smelters. And so that geopolitical risk, which is sort of the broader picture, that geopolitical risk we've tried to eliminate by not selling product or not looking to sell product to traders who might then have problems down the track trying to place that product into somewhere that has got an argument with Canada. So that's how we have dealt with that. But the current impacts of the Russian war against Ukraine are far-reaching, and it could stop tomorrow, and the impacts of that will be felt for years. At the moment, there's 3 zinc smelters that I can think of, and probably some other smelters of other metals in Europe alone that have closed down. So what that means is that, and there are a number of other smelters of various different metals around the world who are on reduced operating hours or have reduced or curtailed their production because of high energy prices or some other technical flaw that's related to the ability to get a product. And it all comes back to that conflict. And so right now we have very low, and I put out in my slideshow, we've got a very low zinc stockpile. Great, we've got also reduced stockpiles of other things, but we've also got low demand. And we've got very high treatment charge, which is the price that the smelters charge suppliers of copper and zinc and other concentrates to treat the product. And so we're seeing circumstances around the world that have never ever been seen before. So this is a very unique circumstance, and the markets and the supply and demand and the ability to produce metals from concentrates and the ability to source concentrates and the ability to source people, the ability to source energy, everything is in turmoil. And so I think you'd be very brave to make predictions, but I'm going to make one anyway, and I'm going to be wrong. And the prediction is this, that there's going to be turmoil and uncertainty, and the rules won't be the rules for probably the next 2 years, I would think. No matter what happens, it's going to take a couple of years to wash out. So if the conflict in Ukraine stopped tomorrow, there's going to be, a period of time to build up gas and energy supplies. There's going to be a period of time for players in the industrial world to get back to a point where they have got full production. And once they get to full production or they start ramping up full production, the world stockpiles are going to fall very fast because the smelters will not be able to come back on stream fast enough to keep up with that production. And then what happens in interim with stockpiles if demand on metals falls faster than the ability to smelt metals is something I just can't predict. And the miners over the next 2 years are going to be, and already are feeling the effects of that demand, because concentrate stockpiles, which are different from metal stockpiles, the concentrate stockpiles are going up, metal stockpiles are going down, and the guy in the middle isn't able to convert the concentrates to the metal. And all of that together is something the world has never ever seen. And so it's going to be a time of great uncertainty, but at the end of that uncertainty, there's going to be a massive, massive boom in demand for all metals, not just critical metals.
Good point. Doug?
Well, I on a slightly different tack, but still, I think apropos to what Scott was just saying, I'm going to make a prediction too, and it's based on my long history. Back in the 1970s, there was a lot of investment in the mining industry by manufacturers, people who used the end products. And we're beginning to see that now. Tesla made a very large investment in some of the lithium explorers and potential producers. And I think you're going to see more interest from the end users, I think that you'll start to see JVs or some sort of partnerships, critical investments maybe, by some of these producers or consumers in the early stage explorers and especially the producers. And I just throw it out there because I think that every explorer and every producer is always looking for where am I going to raise the money. And I think we have to be a little bit more creative and go to a slightly different target audience and when making our pitch in the next few years. Because I think that exactly what Scott's saying, I think some of these people who are consuming metals are going to be wondering where the heck they're going to get a reliable supply. So there you go.
Yeah, and I'll just point out, I mean, over the past 6 months, some of the headlines that I've been reading are things that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. Like, I mean, Chrystia Friedland actually said, we're going to try to fast track mineral projects and oil and gas projects in Canada to, supply the world. And I was like, oh my God. Fast track the permitting. Anyhow, we'll see how that actually ends up happening. But I mean, and she's responding to, all of these various dignitaries, mostly from Europe, saying, oh my God, Russia, I mean, to echo what Scott says, even if the war ends tomorrow, Russia is sort of shut off from investment for a number of years now. And so they go, okay, well, where's a big undeveloped resource base? Well, Canada, pretty good. And so you're seeing it at the political level, you're hearing it from the political level. The world, Europe in particular, is saying Russia is shut off. That's a huge source of energy and minerals. And so they're looking to Canada to fill in that gap. And, again, echoing what Doug says, you're going to see different investors. You're going to see investors looking for different things than we've seen in the past, 20 years because of that change.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I'm sure Fatini's in the audience somewhere, and she'll correct me on these numbers on Monday, tomorrow when she speaks, but we're seeing well over 60 to 70% now support in the general public for mineral exploration and mining. So, and those are polling numbers done by MABC, and AME has recently done some polling as well, and we're seeing well over 55 to 60% support for advancements of responsible mineral exploration and mining. So we haven't seen numbers like that going to, the Chrystia Friedland comments in many, many years. So we're now down to about 5 minutes standing between us and lunch. So I'm going to go to closing comments. You are all, of course, very familiar with many of the advocacy points that the Yukon Chamber has been making, that AME's been making, that PDAC has been making as well to all levels of government. Scott, we were talking a little earlier as well about the Fraser Institute and where different jurisdictions rank. So my question to you, to this audience, knowing that there's government in the audience as well, is what is the one ask that you would have that supports the broader asks to be able to advance critical mineral exploration and or mining in the Yukon?
One ask?
Just one. Yeah, there's 3 of you. That makes 3 asks. And you have about a minute each.
Okay. Speaking of the Fraser Institute, so the Fraser Institute survey is a pretty is a survey. Survey results are always followed with interest, and so the latest survey results are that Yukon is a top 10 investment destination in the world. Fantastic. It's actually 6th in the world for mineral endowment and mineral opportunity, and that is because the Yukon has it all. For such a small place, it has everything. It's a very rich endowment. It is one of the best places in the world to be if you're looking for geology and good geology. Unfortunately, the Fraser Institute survey also says that from a regulatory perspective, from a public regulations and public processes, it's 23rd. So I think the challenge is with the current work happening in the Yukon, with the working on the Mining Act, 6th is the opportunity. That's where we can be. 23rd is the reality. So my one ask is, let's close the gap.
Yeah, good one.
I'm sitting here with two producers or potential producers, so I'm going to take an exploration tact on this question. I think that the most critical thing Yukon can do is get land use planning sorted out. It needs to be completed because the uncertainty is driving everybody crazy. But it also has to be done in a way that's fair to the industry. And when I say that, the current system is essentially, when the land use planning is completed, any claims that fall within an area of low probability for exploration or excluded from exploration are essentially expropriated. There's no compensation. And that's not fair. If we've gone out, we've acquired ground, and we've explored in good faith, and we made discoveries, and we moved ahead, there's got to be some reasonable compensation, not being able to move the assessment credits that are on remain on the claims, moving them to another property in Yukon. Some explorers don't have any other claims to move them to, and in many cases the expenditures are in the millions of dollars, but the claims have been held for many, many years, so there's not that much left in assessment credits. The expenditures have far exceeded the value of the assessment credits. So there has to be a workable way, as the land use planning goes forward, to compensate the explorers whose claims are no longer explorable, either because they're cut off for access or because they fall in an area of critical habitat. So that's my message to government. Get your act together, guys, because it's killing exploration. Mining can go ahead because we've got a lot of really good projects. Exploration is going to wither on the vine, and in 30 years' time, you're going to have nothing left.
I'll take a slightly different tact, although I certainly agree with Doug and Scott. I mean, I'm going to talk about energy. We're talking about an energy transition, and we started off about, why are there critical minerals? The critical minerals really is being driven by the energy transition. Well, let's be part of that energy transition. As I said, if you look, the Yukon has these goals to be net zero by 2050. Canada has that goal. Like I said, companies have these goals. Large companies have these goals. But to make that happen, to find green energy for the long-term solution in the Yukon needs to start now. We know that it's going to take a decade to do a transmission line or whatever that ends up being, but there needs to be a significant drive. It needs to be well thought out, and you need to move the Yukon off of, we all drive past and see the diesel generators that they keep adding on. Anyhow, there's going to be some more talks about this, I think, coming up, but I think that's a real critical thing. The Yukon is number 6 in mineral endowment. This is going to be an important part of the solution to the global energy crisis, but to make that happen, we're going to need to have green energy.
Yeah, all great points, and I think they all really touch on the need of urgency. The broader world, those of us that aren't in the room right now, are all talking about critical minerals and their importance to our broader future, and they're all expecting that can happen in the next year or two. And I think those of us in the room know how long an exploration cycle is, how long the permitting cycle is, what that means, and not only for mineral exploration projects, but for energy projects, for that transition. So to Scott's point, how do we close that gap, and how do we deliver to the broader world what we really are here to do? So we'll leave everybody in this room with that challenge and thought. So thank you all. Wonderful panel. Really appreciate your time. And we'll pass back to Brianna, or should we just go for lunch?